So if you're in the right place, you're in the right place where this is the 2025 legislative session webcast. I'm Casey Kula. I'm Oregon Wild State Forest Policy Coordinator. And tonight we have three experts. You can see them arrayed in the squares, ready to share the details of problems that they see, bills that might address some portion of that problem and solve it, and why those things matter, and then how you can help. Um, so there's a moment for helping. Oh, all right. Sorry, I saw a hand raised and it threw me off. So you can answer your questions into the Q&A at any moment. If we get a flood of questions right at the very end of people speaking, then it'll be hard to sort them out, but I can start getting through them as we go. A link to the recording of this session will be emailed out shortly after, and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel, along with the email will include like links to the bills we discussed and resources for taking action. And because we have a lot of new people joining us today for this presentation, I'm going to do a quick introduction to Oregon Wild. So we're a statewide conservation and advocacy group that for the past 50 years has focused on safeguarding Oregon's wild lands, wildlife, ancient forest, and waterways. And sorry, Danielle, I put wildlife second. We rely on passionate people like you all to be involved in the work, whether that's advocating for wild and scenic rivers like the Minam and the Wallowa, or defending old growth forests, or being a voice for native wildlife. And if you'd like to learn more about our work, if you haven't already, go to OregonWild.org. And so before we begin hearing from experts, we need to acknowledge that here in Oregon and wherever you are, we are on lands that are stolen, that were stolen by force from the original people of what we now call Oregon, whose descendants comprise both the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon, as well as tribes in neighboring states and indigenous people who are not members of tribes, neither federally recognized nor non-recognized. And this land includes our public lands, but it also includes our cities and our farms and our ranches and our homes and our businesses that are all located on the lands that were never given to us or to our government. And the indigenous inhabitants of what we call Oregon are both ancestors and even walking the land. I'm coming to you from a River Island farm, walking the land that I live on now. And they're our family and our friends and our neighbors. They're still here. But I would say that especially now in what I can only think of as cruel and chaotic times, I want to lift up our tribal nations and their sovereignty. And I send our thanks to the people who have came before us. And with that, I would love to introduce you to our first panelist, which is Caleb Lay. He's the Director of Policy and Research for Oregon Rural Action. And he's going to talk to us about many things, but probably groundwater and fertilizer. So to you, Caleb, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Casey. Really honored to be here. Thank you to you and Oregon Wild and to everybody who is here tonight to learn about some of this stuff. We've got quite a great lineup and a lot of really important issues to share with you. As Casey said, my name is Caleb Lay. I'm Director of Policy and Research with Oregon Rural Action. We're a small nonprofit group operating out here in Northeast Oregon. And primarily we work on an issue you may have heard of about in the news. It's the Lower Umatilla Basin nitrate crisis. I have some slides here. I'm going to see if I can pull them up. My coworkers like to say that I have the technical ability of an old man. Can you all see my slides right now? All right, wonderful.
I can see them.
Thank you, Casey. So you may have heard about the Lower Umatilla Basin in the news. I'm just going to go through a brief and quick as I can background. I've been told that I ramble about this sometime. I'll try to keep that to a minimum. This is the Lower Umatilla Basin up here in this area. Here you can see the entire state of Oregon. Lower Umatilla Basin is sort of right here in this area, this small purple outlined chunk. It's around about the size of the city of Houston, Texas, home to around 45,000 people. And notably, it's been a groundwater management area since 1990. It was established almost immediately following the passage of what's known as the Groundwater Quality Protection Act of 1989. Basically, that's a really fancy way of saying that the groundwater in this area is really badly contaminated with this chemical called nitrate. Um, the levels of contamination there are extreme. Anything over 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate is known to cause a laundry list of health problems. Everything from this horrible condition called blue baby syndrome or methemoglobinemia, which essentially it bonds nitrate bonds with your red blood cells. And in infants, if too much nitrate bonds with those red blood cells, well, they don't have many to spare. And so it can cause them to turn blue or in extreme cases to suffocate. It's a really horrifying condition. Um, Nitrate's also linked to things like cancers of the gastrointestinal tract, thyroid dysfunction, miscarriage, birth defects like neural tube defects, really, really bad stuff. And despite the fact that the state knew that this contamination was really bad in this area in 1990, and despite the fact that some 80% of Oregonians rely on groundwater for their drinking water, widespread testing of people's domestic wells didn't start until 2022. That's when Oregon Rural Action and some Morrow County commissioners and public health officials started going door to door, just knocking and saying, hey, can we test your well? We think there might be a problem. Right away, we learned that things were catastrophically bad. Hundreds of people were affected. People were self-disclosing health problems. To date, now that we've been able to pressure the state to get a well testing program up and running, we're up to around 750 households that are either receiving a bottled water deliveries to their doors, or they have had a filter installed under their sink because the water in their tap is unsafe and was making them sick. Unfortunately, we thankfully have all those people and those thousands of individuals and families receiving safe water, but we have a lot of wells that still need to be tested. And there was a DEQ study that came out last month that found nitrate levels are still going up, just as they have since 1990. Now, the legislation I'm going to talk to you about tonight is mostly targeted at dealing with the sources of the nitrate. And it comes from three major chunks. There's the industrial wastewater that gets collected and just spread on farmland as a way of disposing of it. There are dairies and feedlots, also known as confined animal feeding operations. The lower Umatilla Basin is home to both one of the largest CAFOs in the United States and the largest manager of industrial wastewater in Oregon. On top of that, there's agricultural fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer like ammonium nitrate, chemicals that are made in plants and then are spread on farmland so that farmers can boost the amount of crops that they're getting off of that land. I've got a few photos I'm going to run through really quickly here. This is the Coyote Springs Power Plant in Boardman. It produces well, first of all, it's one of the largest sources of greenhouse gases in the state of Oregon, 1.5 million metric tons in 2023. Really bad. It's run by PGE. It produces wastewater that gets land applied along with the wastewater from some food processors, factories that make processed food like French fries, frozen potato products. Lamb Weston has 3 plants in the same area. They make like McDonald's French fries, things like that. This is a photo I took from an airplane over 3 Mile Canyon Farms, which is where Tillamook actually gets a lot of its milk. If you look really closely, these are all cows. This is the largest dairy in the United States, and you can't see the entire thing in this photo. This was as much as I could get in one. These lagoons hold the manure where all those cows, they poop, they pee, it gets put in these lagoons, liquefied, and then spread on farmland. Now, with all of this stuff, if you put too much on a field, more than the plants can handle, well, eventually it's going to find its way down through the soil and into groundwater, especially because this area has really, really sandy soils. So it's only going to just move down, down, down. This last photo might look like the most innocuous of them all, but this sprinkler right here is actually one of the biggest problems. That's a circle pivot, and what farmers will do, across the country, across the world, is they will pipe synthetic fertilizers into those sprinklers and spread it with that irrigation water. Now, this chart was taken from the second Lower Umatilla Basin Groundwater Management Area Action Plan. I'm not ever going to say those words again in that order. It's too much. But basically, this comes from the plan that we had back in 2020 to try and reduce nitrate in groundwater that didn't work. Now you can see this chart actually comes from a study done in 2011. Food processor land app, that's a lot of the wastewater piece, CAFO land app, and then irrigated ag is that fertilizer piece. Now, since 2011, when this was made, this pie has not shrunk. It's probably changed a little bit. It's been 15 years, but if anything, all of these three big pieces have just gotten bigger. The pie itself has gotten bigger. The contamination has gotten worse. Now, to cut to the chase so that I don't ramble, we're looking at three bills this year that would be extremely helpful for us in dealing with some of these problems. The first is SB 747. We had a public hearing on it early this month. Basically, what this bill would do is require Oregon's largest irrigated farms, only those 200 acres or more, to just tell the state how much that they used. How much fertilizer did you put on your fields? It is incredible that Oregon does not already collect that information. And without knowing exactly how much is being put on these fields, at what rate, on what crop, there's no way for us to tell who are the problems and who are not, to distinguish the good actors from the bad and to figure out what we're going to do next. This is the first fundamental step in solving that biggest chunk of that pie, the fertilizer piece. And the second is SB 80. This is a bill that's being advanced by the Stand Up to Factory Farms Coalition. ORA is a part of that coalition. Basically, this would just say, hey, in places where the nitrate contamination is already so bad that there's a groundwater management area, we shouldn't permit any new dairies and feedlots, no new CAFOs. Let's not make the problem any worse with any new sources until we have the groundwater fixed. And then the third is to fix the Groundwater Quality Protection Act. This place has been a groundwater management area since 1990, and it's only gotten worse since that. And a lot of that is because the law that sets up groundwater management areas is just fundamentally broken in ways that we have to change if we're going to make this right. There are three groundwater management areas in Oregon: the Lower Umatilla, the Southern Willamette, and the Malheur. There are a bunch of other places that probably should be Guamas. And if we're going to get this solved and solve this for all the people who are affected by this contamination of nitrate or of any other contaminant, we got to fix that law. Now, the governor's working on that. We don't have a bill number for it yet, but you can bet you'll hear it from us when they do. That's what I've got. I'm probably at or about to be over my time here. So if you have any more questions, check out our website. We have an interactive map of sources of pollution. And this is my contact info here if anyone wants to follow up. And of course, I'll hand these slides over to Casey afterward if he wants to send them out as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caleb. And again, questions in the chat. And we'll talk in about 30 or 25 minutes. We'll talk about how you can help. And now I'd like to introduce Justin Boyles. Justin Boyles is the conservation advocate at Environment Oregon. And Justin's going to talk about a pesticide bill and also the legislative priorities of Environment Oregon and how you can plug into some of their work. Justin, do you have the ability to share yet?
Oh, there we go. Yep, I do. I see it right there. I was just about to
Awesome.
ask. I don't know how to do this.
And
So let
welcome,
me
Justin. Thank
see.
you for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking at trying to see if this is able to share or not. Is that coming through for anyone or?
I don't see it yet, Justin.
All right, let's see. It looks like I would have to restart Zoom to share my slides. Is there any way that you would be able to share them, Casey?
Oh, let me think about that. Let's Danielle, are you up for presenting now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, we will swap positions here, and we'll get back to Justin. Thank you, Danielle Moser, Wildlife Program Manager at Oregon Wild, to talk about so many amazing things that Oregon Wild's working on with a lot of partners. So over to you, Danielle.
Thanks. Can you see my slides? Okay, great. Hi everyone. Well, I don't have to do an organization intro, so that at least buys me some time because I always have a lot to say. So thank you so much for joining us. Like Casey said, I'm the Wildlife Program Manager and excited to talk to you about what we're doing in the legislature as it pertains to species conservation. Oh, there we go. Okay. And, you know, I want to say that Oregon Wild has our own priorities, but we work really a lot with our wildlife conservation partners. We're part of a coalition called the Oregon Wildlife Coalition. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, a lot of other wildlife conservation organizations are also actively working on. So first, I just kind of want to talk about these sort of three buckets or themes of things we're focused on this legislative session. So one is, and this is a very broad bucket, but just combating the extinction crisis by supporting species and habitat resiliency. You know, the more I talk to people, I realize, you know, we talk about this global extinction crisis. And I think when we say that, I think for a lot of folks, it feels like it's a problem or an issue that's affecting other countries. You know, it's kind of this other thing that's affecting elephants and lions. And while that is true, the extinction crisis is having real and profound impacts in Oregon. You know, here in the state alone, we have almost 300 species considered at an elevated risk of extinction. And so there is a lot we can do just in policy itself to better support species conservation and the habitat that they rely on. And, you know, there's a lot of impacts both for species themselves, but also for humans in our communities. You know, we were just talking about impacts in agriculture. We know a lot now about how pollinators and those species, you know, at risk of extinction and how that could really disrupt our food systems and medicine. You know, there's a whole list of things that have direct impacts to humans as well as to species themselves. And so biodiversity matters a lot. And, you know, the solutions to address biodiversity are sometimes different than the solutions to address climate change. And so, you know, climate change is exacerbating a lot of the challenges for species, but there are also other things we can be doing to better support them that isn't necessarily in the climate change context. And so anyway, so that's kind of one big bucket of things we're focused on. The other, and this is really directly related, is just actually having the funding to do the necessary research, to have practitioners on the ground, you know, doing and implementing conservation measures to better protect species. And so a lack of funding has been one of the major reasons that species are in decline. So we'll talk a lot about funding things for this session. And then finally, and, you know, kind of again, stemming off these other two, but really with population growth and development and just changes to landscapes, it's putting humans and wildlife in more and more conflict. And so we are, you know, looking to the legislature to definitely not just turn to, you know, to lethal as a way to deal with conflict, but actually be better supporting and fostering coexistence and stewardship with our wildlife. So we have a couple bills related to that. Okay. So now getting into the nuts and bolts of what specifically this legislative session. And I'm going to take the bulk of the time to talk about this first one because it really relates to so much of what I just said regarding trying to combat extinction and put our species on a better path. So funding has really been a major struggle. And it's, you know, I can spend minutes upon minutes, if not hours, talking about the way that the model has been set up to fund fish and wildlife conservation. But suffice it to say that, you know, a model across America has really been, you know, those that hunt and fish have paid for fees and licenses, and that money has gone back in to the fish and wildlife agencies like ODF&W to support their programs. And, you know, that's all well and good. We don't necessarily have a problem with that, except for the fact that it misses 88% of the rest of the species in the state that are not hunted or fished. And so it's really been a challenge to try to diversify funding for the agency and make sure that they are adequately resourced to actually, adhere to their conservation mission. And so we've been, looking to, are there different revenue streams? There's been task force. There's been so many attempts to try to figure out a long-term funding solution for species recovery. It probably goes without saying, but when you think about getting ahead of rather investing in species conservation before they're to the point of being endangered is much more cost effective than waiting until you have only a handful of a species left. And so we really are trying to get out ahead of this, but it's been difficult. And so this bill, we call it 1% for wildlife, is an increase to the state tourism tax. The state tourism tax, otherwise known as the state transient lodging tax or the TLT, is a tax at 1.5%. When you go to a hotel or an Airbnb or a lodge, you will see this on your bill. And so, given that our wildlands and our wildlife, there's a lot of recreation and tourism that is based upon wildlife related activities. And so we see a really strong nexus between, mitigating impacts of tourism, but also trying to better support the thing that actually fuels tourism as well. So we see a direct connection. And so that's why we're looking to the TLT and an increase to the TLT to fund wildlife conservation. So this bill is House Bill 2977. There's a public hearing up on Monday. So we are definitely looking for folks to submit written testimony. If you can, give verbal testimony, but generally show your support for the state investing in wildlife conservation. Taxes are never an easy thing. We understand that, but we think this is the best and most logical place to look for finding a long-term funding source that's sustainable for Oregon's most imperiled species. So that's a top one and a priority for many, many groups. The next two kind of go to that reducing conflict with wildlife that I was talking about. The first one is a stewardship program that better funds wildlife rehab centers and ensures that ODFW has staff to actually do more education and outreach when there is conflict with wildlife, especially in the urban and suburban interface, in those conflict zones as development and sprawl and all the things are happening and putting humans in conflict in a lot more situations we would like to avoid. And so this is a funding bill that would better support that stewardship with wildlife. The other one is landowners living with beavers. Again, this is a grant program that would go through like soil and water conservation districts, but it's a way to ensure that not only are we asking people, hey, don't just kill beavers on your land, but ensuring they actually have the access to tools to be able to mitigate that conflict non-lethally. And so that's another one, again, to help better fund coexistence. And then finally, this is just something we always track every biennium, every 2 years, is the Department of Fish and Wildlife's budget. Even more so after seeing the budget and seeing how small of a fraction, generally natural resources get from the general fund. But when you look at even at ODFW's budget and how small of a percentage is going to conservation of our most imperiled species, it's kind of overwhelming. It's about 1.7% of total funds for the department are for their conservation program. And so this reiterates for us again and again why we need to figure out a different funding mechanism for that work. And so anyway, we're tracking this budget and we're going to weigh in when the public testimony when the public hearing, is posted. But again, it just really, for us, reinforces why we need to continue to not have to go in this, back and forth asking every 2 years for pennies to pay for conservation. Because really, when you talk about recovering species, you need these long-term investments. You can't have money 1 year and then not the next. And so those are the big pieces of legislation. And then the final thing I want to say is just regarding well, everything happening at the federal level, which is so overwhelming, and I'm sure everybody here is feeling that. And we do fully expect, just like the Trump administration attempted last time, to roll back protections for, species under the Endangered Species Act, cut funding, which is already happening, and then prematurely removing species from the endangered species list. And so all of these things, obviously are not state policy, but what it does is it really puts front and center, okay, well, what is Oregon doing to shore up species conservation and protection measures? And right now, our Endangered Species Act, Oregon Endangered Species Act, is quite weak. It just really doesn't do the work we need it to do. And so, we're talking to legislators, we're exploring what could we do, especially with potential rollbacks to the federal ESA and to funding. So it just really makes this state work, I think, that much more important in these times. So that's what I've got. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
I will stop sharing. There we go.
Okay, I really appreciate it. We'll talk some more. We have a couple of questions in the chat. Sorry, I should have mentioned the Q&A function, which is between the, let's see, for you, well, you'll see it. It says Q&A. That's the place to put your questions. So thank you. Oh my gosh, and Justin, look, I delayed us enough that Justin's ready to go. Welcome, Justin. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for, sorry for having to shift things around a little bit with the technical difficulties, but I appreciate being here, and yeah, thank you so much for setting me up and letting me be here. So yeah, I wanted to talk to folks about House Bill 2679, which is to protect pollinators and wildlife today. So first, just to take a quick step back to introduce myself. So as Casey said at the beginning, my name's Justin Boyles. I'm Environment Oregon's conservation advocate. I put our full 2025 legislative agenda here just as a bullet pointed list, just to show the breadth of issues that we're working on right now, and a QR code there for folks to scan, but this will also go out with Casey's info for after the webcast. But for those of you who don't know Environment Oregon, we are a state-based environmental group. We look to protect and restore more places where all nature can thrive, and offers us and our children a greater opportunity to live healthier, more enriching lives. So through our research and public education, advocacy, and litigation and action, we look to advance policies and practices that'll put us on a better path. We are one of 30 state-based environmental groups that share a federal advocacy office in Environment America. And our priorities for the 2025 legislative session, include everything from reducing plastic pollution, protecting Oregon's wildlife and special places, supporting clean, renewable energy, and more. And if you want to dive into any of that, once again, that's what the QR code is for. But what I really wanted to talk to folks about was HB 2679. We are working to save bees. We have been working to save the bees as a national network across many different avenues for a while now. Everything from asking Amazon to stop selling bee-killing pesticides to sharing bee-friendly garden tips. We all know that bees and really all pollinators play a crucial role in our lives. But as our society continues to use more pesticides, their populations are plummeting. Fortunately, we know how to help the bees, just by protecting already existing bee habitat, by expanding the habitat that we have and planting pollinator-friendly plants in our own gardens and also on a lot of public land. And also, ending the worst uses of pesticides that are killing them. So this year we've connected with Beyond Toxics, Center for Food Safety, Representative Zach Hudson, and others to push through House Bill 2679 through the Oregon Legislature. So, a little bit of kind of background context on this. like I said before, bees, we know that bees and really all pollinators are vital to our environment. They support more than 80% of wild plants and crops like apples, cherries, blueberries. But unfortunately, 1 in 4 bee species, wild bee species, is at risk of extinction. In addition to that, over 100 bird and fish species are in need of conservation in Oregon. So, the stakes are high for really the future of our ecosystems. Over a decade of research has shown that neonicotinoid insecticides, neonics, are a major culprit in the die-off of pollinators as well as wildlife. And so far, 12 other states have stepped up, following the lead of the city of Eugene, who in 2014 was the first city in the country to ban neonics on city property. But since then, 12 other states have taken action, including other states on the West Coast. So this bill would add neonicotinoid insecticides to Oregon's list of restricted use pesticides. The designation would require folks to have an Oregon pesticide applicator license to purchase and apply them. And additionally, it would prohibit the application of any of these pesticides on residential landscapes, except in some kind of emergency cases. So it's very similar to the stage that has been set by other states that have already passed similar legislation. It's worth pointing out that neonicotinoids are more than just a bee problem. They're a systemic threat to Oregon's ecosystems, as well as our economy. And once applied, these pesticides infiltrate plant tissues. They get into the pollen and the nectar, and at the end of the day, are poisoning our pollinators. We also know that chemical residues from these pesticides can persist for years. They seep into our soil and our waterways. The long-term contamination endangers a host of species, including freshwater snails, butterflies, fish, birds, and all kinds of wildlife critical to Oregon's, the balance that we have here. So specifically, kind of reiterating some of the stuff I said about the specifics of this bill, this would require folks to have a pesticide applicator license to purchase and apply this class of pesticides, neonicotinoids. It would restrict their use on residential property with limited exceptions, but it still allows necessary uses for agricultural production as long as you have that applicator license in those set pieces. So those are really that last piece is kind of the carve out compromise that has been made really in a lot of states across the country to kind of help us take a step in the right direction toward protecting our pollinators and other wildlife. We really do see this as an opportunity to join other states that have already taken this step, removing them from consumer accessible shelves. This would make this class of pesticides one of more than 400 dangerous pesticides that Oregon already restricts in this way from general consumer use. We know that safer, lower toxicity alternatives already exist. And, we just know that by passing this legislation, we can start taking steps toward protecting our pollinators and wildlife, as well as our environment for generations to come. And I think that's the end of my time. So I will just toss this last slide up there, which is just the ways that folks can help out. Just an opportunity to take action simply by sending an email to your legislators, as well as some tips to personalize that email. But I'll stop the share there and hand it back over to Casey.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. I'm really glad we got your presentation up. So good work on it. A slight as questions come in, I want to do a slight personal story to Justin's comments about the persistence of these pesticides on the landscape, to note that in the Willamette Valley, heavy application of second generation DDT derivatives broke down in the soil into a product that is very, very stable and has poisoned a lot of land, a lot of soil in the Willamette Valley, such that cucurbits, so winter squash, summer squash, pumpkins, carrots, sweet potatoes, and potatoes all preferentially take them up and can be harmful to humans. And it's across the Willamette Valley. And it feels like it's if we can do something to prevent it and stop that from happening into the future, we should take the opportunity. So I really appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you. Okay, the first question is for Caleb. Does SB 747 include spreading manure water in that analysis of fertilizer? And that may be in the pie graph, the pie chart, or it might be in the bill itself, the fertilizer.
Gotcha. Really, really good question. So SB 747 is targeted specifically at synthetic fertilizers on the largest irrigated farms. CAFOs, dairies, and feedlots using their manure, they're actually already required to report this information. And it's a really important tool for holding them accountable when they do over apply. I'll say the enforcement on that leaves a lot to be desired, but it's at least a tool that, one, the Department of Ag can use to hold polluters accountable, and two, that we as organizations and as the public can use to hold ODA accountable when they fall down on the job. Transparency is key to getting a hold of anything. And right now on that synthetic fertilizer piece, there is just nothing at all. It is opaque as the night. It cannot get any less transparent. Last thing I want to add, because I think I forgot to mention this in my presentation, SB 747 is targeted very, very strategically. That 200 acre mark that we mentioned in the bill only farms over 200 acres of irrigated land. That would apply to less than 1 in 10 farms in Oregon that use irrigation, a very small percentage. But because so many farms have been consolidated over time, either because young folks don't want to take up the farm or because corporations come in and swallow them up, that less than 1 in 10 farms still covers almost 80% of the irrigated land in this state. You get a lot for a little there. It gets us a lot of the way toward understanding how fertilizer is being used in this state. And that's the most important piece that we need in order to make informed decisions about how we're going to solve this problem statewide and long term.
Nice, that's super helpful. Thank you for the question. One note too is that Caleb's team at Oregon Rural Action also has learned that most folks over a certain scale already are tracking this, right? It's a number that exists, it's just not made available.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe you said that, but it felt important to me.
Yeah,
and then
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure you'll have another topic. I'm sure there's another question for Danielle. I think this is for Danielle. Does ODFW rely on any federal funding that might be in jeopardy?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and actually, I think for what I talked about and what we're hoping to better fund, namely imperiled species recovery. So a lot of that work falls under this sort of guiding blueprint. It's called the State Wildlife Action Plan. And it's essentially every state is mandated by Congress to create a SWAP, as we call them, because we all love a good acronym that can be used as into a word. So every state has a SWAP, and it is the plan for bringing back from the brink of extinction all of the most imperiled species in that state. It's a voluntary program, but it is the way in which ODFW derives a lot of their conservation actions. And so, that being said, a lot of the federal funds that ODFW gets is to implement the SWAP. And so with those funds going to be cut, it only underscores, which is what our bill is going to do, is fully fund the SWAP so that we can protect imperiled species. So yes, the answer is yes, federal funds will definitely impact ODFW.
Awesome. Great. Super helpful. Person asks, I moved to Oregon from Europe and I have a hard time understanding why wildlife NGOs in Oregon try to work with with Fish and Wildlife instead of fighting them heads on. can you clarify why you don't take a harder stance towards them? And I love this because it feels like this is something that Danielle and I talk about all the time. So thank you for pointing out the tension.
So I assume they mean the Fish and Wildlife Agency. Is that what? Okay. I was
Yeah,
like,
I think
I love working with
ODFW.
the Fish and Wildlife. Yeah. Um, that's funny. And you hit us right where Oregon Wild is, which and ODFW would tell you we're not always their friends. So I think it's like anything where we have alignment, we want to work together, and where we don't, we're gonna, um, hold them accountable and be okay doing so. And so I think that tension is always there, like Casey showed with the hand motion. But yeah, I think it hasn't always been the case. But I also will give ODFW credit in that I think they are trying to move out of being stuck in a 20th century model of wildlife management and conservation. And so they've really tried to broaden that tent. They recognize the importance of folks that, don't necessarily hunt and fish to be to be at the table, because we still care about fish and wildlife. So yeah, but it's, they're mad at me one week and we're talking and agreeing on something the next week. And it's just kind of how advocacy is. So
Yeah, and Dan, thank you for that, Danielle. Thanks for taking that on. And great question. Um, and I think I'm trying to think if there's something that ODFW does that's more like there's a few things that they do that are regulatory, as in they have a rule and they're going to enforce it. But a lot of what ODFW does is voluntary, right? Am I getting this correct?
I mean, they have guiding statutes that, and then, from there, how they implement it for sure. But yeah, I mean, the commission definitely adopts, legally binding things for certain, yeah, depends which species. So yeah, I mean, yes,
Yeah.
there's a lot of very voluntary things within it. Yeah.
Yeah, I sat in on a meeting and it was all about working with landowners as opposed to
Sure.
telling them what to do.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that's they definitely want that approach. And to that person, I would say ODFW would not be surprised if they're watching this, that, when it comes to how they manage carnivores, that is usually a place of the tension. But we're agreeing on trying to better move forward coexistence and non-lethal measures. And so that's where then we have agreement. So it just kind of depends on, what the issue is and what day it is.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you. So for Justin, first of all, there's a commenter who is very impressed by your ability to say neonicotinoids, I think is how you're supposed to say it. So bravo. Way to
Nice.
roll. And then can you clarify, Justin, when you talk about population declines and extinction risk, are you talking about domestic European honeybees, wild native bees, or both? Great question. And you could riff off of that because there's so much about native bees, right?
Yeah, and it is such a good question, and it's really a tricky question, because so much of the research that's out there that's been done for so long has been on European, domesticated European honeybees, which, essentially have taken their place in our society as livestock. And so I largely am talking about the decline in honeybees being because there is so much more data connected to that. But we're seeing the same types of activity, coming out of the establishment of the Oregon Bee Atlas, for example. They're finding more wild native bees. I think they're up to 8. I was just talking to a master gardener this morning who was saying that they're up to more than 800 different wild native bees now, some of which are only pollinating from one specific plant in the high desert in eastern Oregon. And so this is really something that's affecting bees across the board. And we are definitely much more concerned even about all of the wild native bee species, than we are about the European honeybees, which, like I said, are kind of being protected more or less as livestock.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Justin. And I
Yeah.
shout out to the Eagle Cap Wilderness. I will say that my child and I were hiking through the Eagle Cap Wilderness last year, and on a warm, sunny day, those like southwest facing slopes are there's so many pollinators, there's so many bees, ones that I don't recognize, and I'm sure would be new if somebody took the time and had the knowledge. So it's really exciting, I think.
Well, and it is really exciting in terms of the bees. It's such an interesting campaign that we've been working on to save the bees. Whereas, really this legislation is meant to really expand upon the idea that we're not just talking about bees. This is all pollinators, all wildlife, our ecosystems. And that's really important. With any campaign, it's nice to have a mascot like a bee. But at the end of the day, we really do see how connected this is to all wildlife.
Yes, truly. Another question from Sarah is, it's an important step to make the application of neonics limited to permits, but who's monitoring, regulating, and educating those landscapers and the general public about the new restrictions, regulations, bans, and that there's a concern that it falls down at that step.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a concern. Luckily, we have, like I said, a number of other states and even like the city of Eugene that had passed this in 2014, a ban on city property. So we definitely have some examples to follow there. It would mostly be, through the Department of Agriculture would be the one monitoring, what dealers are licensed to be dealing it. They have a tracking system that they would have to follow, and then a lot of it does come back to self-reporting. So then if there was a problem that happened somewhere, they could at least track back through that process of seeing, oh well, when was this purchased? Was it a licensed, authorized dealer, authorized user? So it's definitely something we will have to remain vigilant on, after the bill would pass. But also, like I said, just have some examples to follow from other states that have been working through this for a decade now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. Another question for you, Justin. Is Environment Oregon working on restricting glyphosate?
That is, well, it's not one of our priorities as a state right now. It's definitely something we have, dove into in the past. I wouldn't be able to speak to it too much in terms of what the next steps might be. So I don't want to step out of line there, but I'd be excited to follow up with you. Like I said, we're part of a network of groups across the country that I could definitely reach out to other folks to see what opportunities there might be there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And we'll have Justin's contact information in the follow-up email. And then another question from Sarah, which is there, what's the incentive for landscapers to change their practices and educate clients as to why they have to um, change what they're doing, right? Because there is an education component.
Yeah, good question. And yeah, in terms of the incentive for landscapers, I mean, I would step back to the idea that it's an incentive for all of us to be using less lethal means to help make our, gardens and yards and lives and the natural world around us protected. So that's where I would start in terms of saying that's the incentive. There's no, monetary incentive for them. And in terms of educating their clients, that would definitely be something, that would be available through the existing, Oregon Bee Project and the work that is being done, through them to be able to show a lot of the research behind why these changes, are and practices would be necessary. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, and Justin, your presentation is the hot stuff here in the questions. I just want to know, including one comment that you're welcome to address if you'd like to, but I think it stands. There's a person who's asking, does the bill go far enough? Can we advocate for a stronger bill? And then the next comment is there a pathway essentially to stronger than a restricted use designation for ag?
Yeah.
Including the
So
suggestion about having an ag consultant actually write here's why we're using it.
right. So yeah, I think, it's a really good question in terms of just thinking about whether or not this goes far enough. I would kind of start out by saying, with Environment Oregon and really the way that we work to tackle any issue that we see, I mean, most issues out there are pretty huge. Even in terms of protecting our pollinators and wildlife, we're looking at habitat loss, we're looking at climate change, we're looking at the overuse of these toxic pesticides. And this in itself is, one of those three big pieces that we're looking to solve with this legislation. And when I say solve, I would say that's, a little bit of a strong word. We know that it takes incremental change to make a difference and chip away at these big problems over, a long period of time. So, like I said, with Eugene kind of setting the stage in 2014, a dozen states taking action, building on that. A number of those states have passed follow-up legislation in successive years to go further. But once if we went out there and said, all right, ban the use of this pesticide, a lot of it ends up getting coated on seeds instead of even sprayed at this point. So, if we were saying just ban it all out, like the opposition would be insurmountable. And so instead of just going and, trying to hit as hard as we can right off the bat, we find that it's a much better, tactic, similar to what Danielle was saying in terms of working with the department, the Department of Fish and Wildlife. When we can work with people, we want to, and so we can find, a lot of allies and kind of build momentum with a bill like 2679 and kind of move one step closer to where we know we want to be. And that's what we find will be the winning strategy here, would be that this is a step in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, agreed. Um, Danielle, oh, I guess I was thinking this is for Danielle, but it actually really is for all three of you. But mostly because I know which ones Danielle would say are there bills that you're tracking and strategizing in order to oppose? And maybe just like one or two.
Yeah, and others obviously feel free to chime in on in your areas. Yes, there are. I think, before I launch into that, which to be honest, I think it's more, this has been an interesting session to decipher or distinguish what bill is really going to move and really actually warrants like a lot of opposition, and what they say getting like a courtesy hearing. And I feel, from my perspective, that a lot of bills that in previous years didn't even get the time of day in a committee is getting a hearing. And it doesn't necessarily mean there'll be a vote. It doesn't necessarily mean the Democrats will move it, but it's just been an interesting session. So I say that, and then there's, there's a bill to essentially allow counties to bring back hound hunting of cougars, which we don't even necessarily directly work on cougars, but the voters have voted this down twice and said, no, we're not hunting with hounds. And so it's baffling because it's pretty anti-democratic to be like, well, we hear you voters, but we're gonna still, try to overturn that. So there's a lot of things like that. There's an interesting beaver relocation one, which doesn't sound bad, but the reason for it is not probably great. It's more like, hey, you want beavers over there? Then take them out of here because I don't want them, So there's a lot like that. So others chime in, but there's a lot of courtesy hearings that are pissing us all off.
That is extremely well put. And sort of in the same vein, A lot of what ORA does is we have to be in a lot of different arenas at once because we work, you know, in the lower Umatilla Basin where this nitrate crisis exists is also, you know, if it's not already, it's quickly becoming one of the first majority minority places in the state. It's incredibly diverse, a huge immigrant farm worker community. It's also home to about 43% of the state's industrial greenhouse gas emissions. And again, size of the city of Houston, Texas. The term sacrifice zone applies exceptionally well here. This is where all of the pollution gets sequestered in this state and the benefits get exported, right? In that vein, there are some bills that we're watching around trying to peel back Oregon's sanctuary promise law. Again, very anti-democratic. Voters have stood with that law for a very long time in Oregon. In a similar vein to that, there are now 13 bills at last count trying to peel back Oregon's moratorium on nuclear energy. A lot of people fall in a lot of different arenas around that, but 13 bills is a straight up flood the zone tactic. And the one that looks like it's most likely to make it a long ways, if any of them do, would repeal it just for Umatilla County, part of the lower Umatilla Basin. So sequestering more nuclear energy or more waste or anything in this area just seems like a really bad idea. And again, overturning the will of the voters and ballot measures is just flagrantly anti-democratic, especially with flood the zone tactics. So it's not a great answer to that question, but there are a lot of bills to keep an eye on if they move forward.
Yeah, thank you for giving us the range. There's a lot of different ones that affect people in your community. Justin, what do you think?
I was gonna leave that with what they said. I totally think that, you know, yeah, there are a lot of bills. I think, you know, we're tracking, you know, more than 100 different environmentally focused bills through the legislature this session. I You know, and yeah, there's a lot to keep tabs on. I don't think there's anything in particular, especially different than what has been highlighted already, that I'm most concerned about right now.
I just want to say one thing on this as a general thing on state, since this is a webcast on state legislature. This year was, I think, a record year for a number of bills that were introduced. And I'm just going to kind of assume that all of us, you know, support the will of legislators and the ability to, you know, file bills, especially on behalf of their constituents. It's part of democracy. But there really is a question of, you know, the viability of all these bills, and to what Caleb was saying, just like sort of flooding things and then actually causing you know, not enough time in these committees to actually have robust dialogue and like, you know, be able to sort through, you know, and just have these conversations that we need to have. So that, you know, again, it's a tough tension because we don't want to be like, whoop, you're limited to certain bills or a number of bills. But at the same time, this kind of approach means that there's not enough meaningful time to actually discuss and contemplate important concepts. So.
Yes, definitely. Chairs of committees are going to have to decide, and then they decide which one of the flood the zone, for example, when really I'm like, don't hear any of them. So a final question. Well, I want to keep us close to that 7 o'clock, even though it's 7:02. Final question is regarding SB 80. Oh yeah, what areas of Oregon are considered already polluted such that no CAFOs would be allowed under that bill? And Caleb is typing an answer right now.
You beat me to it. I thought we were going to run out of time. The SB 80 would be limited to groundwater management areas that are already declared by the state. Right now, there are 3 in Oregon. There's the lower Umatilla Basin, the one where my organization does a lot of work. There's one over in the Malheur, sort of in the Ontario area, right on the Oregon-Idaho border, right on the Snake River. That one's been around since I believe 91. Don't fact check me on that. It's somewhere in that ballpark. And then the last is actually the southern Willamette, sort of down in that Corvallis neck of the woods. All 3 are due to nitrate. I would say the CAFOs are a really significant part of it. If anyone's interested, check out Food and Water Watch's maps of CAFOs in Oregon. If you just Google that, they should come up. It's a pretty compelling overlay, just the groundwater management areas and where confined animal feeding operations in Oregon are concentrated. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. And I just want to note before we close out, is that in the chat there's a note from Kathy about, or in the Q&A, that the Walla Walla tribal chief and the people oppose, I think it's small modular nuclear reactors, and I think it's really important to note.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Caleb, for working on that, and thank you to honestly anybody who is opposing them. I felt like I had to educate. Well, I did choose to educate a legislator the other day about the history and why we have this moratorium and like the purpose of it and who fought for it originally. And yeah, it was a hard conversation to have, but it really was important. With that, thank you all so much. Thank you for wonderful questions from the audience. We'll have a follow-up email with contact information, a link to the YouTube, and links to all the bills that we've talked about today or tonight. So thank you all. Y'all are really awesome attendees, and thank you so much to panelists tonight.